Alright guys, we are back for a part 2 macro paper 2 economics AQA 2025 I'd say. And what I'm going to do today is show you guys how to answer a 15 and a 25 mark essay. And this 25 marker is my actual econ exam and I got a perfect essay, 25 out of 25 here. So without further ado, let's get straight into it and see what happens. Right, so when I say 15 markers, I mean really I want it to be two 9 markers, and that's the format you should follow. So obviously you've got your definition, you've got your diagram, you've got your explanation, chain of analysis, this means, therefore, this leads to, as a result, and you've also got a link going back to it. Obviously it should flow, it shouldn't feel like two different things, but I want you to treat it as so. Two 9 markers. I'd even go further to say, if you can't necessarily find too strong of a link or your points are slightly weaker, I'd rather you actually go for 3 just to be safe. But obviously, bear in mind your timing, what you think is best for you, and work alongside that. So my choice would be 2 9 markers, remembering the definition, remembering the chain of analysis, and what else? You have a diagram. Diagram, guys, is key. Diagram is key. Your link back. And make sure you keep it on the extract. If it's not an extract, use your information. Use your facts and figures. So, what have I written here? Let's get into it. This essay was a 11 out of 15, a lower end of a level 5 or just higher end of a level 4. So it could be better, but we're still going to go through it. Okay, the question asks, explain how a supply side policy can help achieve a low and stable rate of inflation. Pretty simple question. Let's get into it. Inflation refers to a sustained rise in the general price level over a set period of time. Definition marks. As the UK right now, inflation has eased from 11.1% rate post-COVID to now 2.6% in our target rate of 2 + 1 - %. So, one thing you must know is the macroeconomic objectives of the government. What do they want? Where do they want inflation? Where do they want unemployment? Where do they want everything else, the exchange rate or so? So you have to keep everything in that sense consistent. Remember where that is. And on top of that, you need to know where we are right now. So, are we hitting our inflation levels? So over here, it was 11.1%. When our target is just 2% ± 1%. The difference, say that is a 7% difference. You state that there's a 7% difference. How far are we from achieving our goal, if that makes sense? So, nice easy intro. Basic, point, knowledge, easy. Knowledge. So, firstly, supply side policies boost long-run productive capacity, leading to a fall in inflation levels. Easy single point and knowledge right there. Given that in 2023, the UK has allocated 5.9 billion to supply side policies, the government could spend on policies such as investment in education and training to improve the long-run productive potential of the economy. So, firstly, given that is a key. Given that. In 2023, I've given a fact. By the way, none of this has an extract. This is the essay pairing. This is all my own knowledge. In 2023, the UK has allocated 5.9 billion. Examiners, they love facts and figures. That's what they're all about. They love facts, figures, history, and they want you to implement that into your answer. So give it your best to do that. Give it your best attempt to hit one of them, and we move on. As a result of training and education, chain of analysis going on from here, the quantity and quality of labour increases, and given that labour is a factor of production, that is a solid sentence there. Given that labour is a factor of production. So why does one thing lead to another, and why does that affect the entire growth? Why does that lead to growth, if that makes sense? LRAS increases from LRAS 1 to LRAS 2. Got my diagram here. Diagram is key. As a result, assuming ceteris paribus, ceteris paribus is a very, very strong phrase. You must have heard it a million times already. Ceteris paribus basically means keeping everything else constant. Keeping everything else constant. Right? Nice and easy. Assuming ceteris paribus with demand side, there's no demand side shocks going on, and this can be used as an evaluation. Like, why would demand be kept consistent? There will always be something shifting demand. There's always some sort of change in the economic activity in the economy. Price level falls from P1 to P2, illustrating a low and stable rate of inflation. I've used my entire chain of analysis to deliver my point, if that makes sense. Secondly, supply side policies. What I could have done better here is talk about my ceteris paribus. So although with ceteris paribus it leads to this, in a realistic world, which is one of the strongest evaluations out there, in a real world, is it true? Ceteris paribus with demand? No, there's going to be like a million things going on. There'll be consumer demand, there'll be the subjective utility of people falling. There will be something going whereby demand is going to change or supply is going to change. Whatever you've kept ceteris paribus is not going to stay constant, if that makes sense. So I could have added a small evaluation that would have increased my marks. Secondly, supply side policies can also boost the short run impact and lead to a short term lower rate of inflation. Simple, nice point there and a diagram. Supply side policies to reduce the cost of production shift SRAS from SRAS 1 to SRAS 2, resulting in the fall of price level from P1 to P2. Hence, SSPs can help achieve a low rate of inflation. This shows a level 3, not a level 5. I was incorrect over there by miles as well. This shows a level 3 analysis. So I've got application, understanding, but it could be developed further. From what I'm seeing here, if I'm not wrong, I had rushed my 25 marker. And that's fair because sometimes you have to understand bigger essays equals bigger marks. So although I lost a few marks here, I was able to double down, triple down on my marks in the bigger essays, such as the 25 marker, if that makes sense. So, given that essay, obviously, it could be developed further. It was pretty weak near the end. The first paragraph was still good. I could add howevers at the end of every sentence. Not like a massive evaluation, because they don't really want that. They want like a more point. But on top of the link, however, ceteris paribus, that doesn't make sense. Or however, supply side policies can do this, but in the short run. What about in the long run? Is it going to have like a sustainable effect, if that makes sense? Okay, moving on to question 12. So that question was a 11 out of 15 by the examiner, level 3, and this one was a 25 out of 25, perfect essay. So let's get into it. The question asks, evaluate the view that a low rate of inflation is always beneficial for a country's macroeconomic performance. Nice, easy question. And you'll see what examiners do in their questions. A low rate of inflation is always beneficial. Immediately in my mind, I'm like, yeah, it's a good thing. Inflation is always a good thing. So, but why are they twisting the question, making it sound different? We go say, yeah, why would we want inflation in the first place? So the examiner really wants to challenge the way you think, if that makes sense. He wants to see where you're trying to get with this point. And you have to kind of shock the examiner and show him that this is the entirety of the circle. This is what's going to happen. So let's get into it. Inflation refers to a sustained rise in the general price level over a set period of 2025. Over a set period of time, sorry. That's my definition mark right there. Let's start highlighting so we can get a little bit more information out. As of 2025, the inflation rate in the UK is 2.6%. My figure. Following a record high of 2022 of 11.1% post-pandemic. So, once again, history. History is very important. Okay, so this is the inflation rate. Why is that actually a big deal? Why is it important? For example, 11.1% was incredibly important because we followed on from 15 years of rock bottom inflation rates, right? We were near interest rates. We were very, very low on interest rates for an incredibly long period of time. And then immediately after, it just zoomed up, right? So it had a massive effect. So why is it actually a big deal if inflation's here or if inflation's there, interest rates here? You have to think of that. You have to let them know. Then I give the direction over here. This essay will evaluate if a low rate of inflation is always beneficial for macroeconomic performance. considering living standards, what am I going to be talking about? Trade and growth as a whole, given the UK's current climate. Guys, copy paste this sentence. Copy paste that sentence. It is a cheat code. This sentence is a cheat code, given the UK's current climate. Do your research around the current climate of the UK and why is it actually a big deal. Right. Firstly, a low rate of inflation satisfies one of the UK's primary objectives and is highly beneficial for macroeconomic performance. Obviously, it satisfies basically every single country's macroeconomic performance, but just to zoom into a country. Right. Currently in the UK, bang. Currently in the UK, I'm talking about the climate. Why is this going to be significant? Confidence levels are weak and wage growth is increasing, but also at a very weak near 4%. Facts and figures. A low and stable rate of inflation mixed with a 4% wage growth leads to a stronger real wage, which can in fact boost marginal propensity to consume. And my chain of analysis is one thing to another thing to another thing, and it follows. This means this, therefore, this leads to a greater marginal propensity to consume. So I've taken one thing, real wages. I've taken low inflation. I've mixed them, and I've told you why is this a big deal. Given that, guys, in the UK, consumption accounts for 2/3 of AD. That's a true fact. Use that in your essays. And what I could have done here is write down the AD's equation, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So, but regardless, we move on. AD increases from 81 to 82, leading to an increase in real GDP. And I've shown that on the diagram. I've illustrated that with my drawing. As production increases, more labour is demanded, as labour is a derived demand. Key sentence there. Copy paste that. Labour is a derived demand. Yes, it is. Very, very important sentence. That's going to actually level up your answer. That one sentence, examiners, they love that. Hence, unemployment levels fall, increasing disposable incomes and leading to higher levels of consumption and growth. Chain of analysis once again. This is especially important as growth has been stagnating in the UK at 1.1% with quarterly growth rates at 0.1%. So I'm getting all these facts and figures, if I remember correctly, from Econ Plus Dow's video. So he just went through a load of different main key information, if that makes sense. So he was speaking about the inflation rate, growth rate, CPI, just the most important stuff, if that makes sense. So remember, watch his videos. He's very good. He's basically helped me. My teachers and Econ Plus Style, credit goes to them massively. So, stagnating at 1.1%. This is especially important. Can I just elaborate? Especially important. I'm illustrating the significance. Growth has been stagnating in the UK at 1.1% with quarterly growth rates at 0.1%. Hence, low levels of inflation can increase growth, but more importantly, real wage, which boosts consumption, which leads to improved living standards. Beautiful. Chain of analysis, easy finish to that as well. And my hence, use your hence, guys. Hence, therefore. Okay. However, as seen in figure 1, inflation benefits are not long lasting as increased consumption leads to demand pull inflation. I'm not saying one thing's bad, one thing's good. I'm saying this is my point 1, but this is also wrong with my point 1. I need to really reiterate the importance of evaluation when it comes to this type of stuff. This is key. We're not saying one thing's good, one thing's bad. We're saying point 1 says this, however, point 1 is bad because, or however, point 1 can be better because. Long lasting as increased consumption leads to demand pull inflation, making all benefits short term, long term, massive comparison over there. The government hence has to react, e.g. via supply side policies to reduce the rate of inflation, but it is important to understand how the UK's government lacks funds as of right now, with a national debt of 95.5% of GDP and interest payments forecasted to reach 105 billion this year due to heavy borrowing and during the pandemic. Just spit facts. I'm telling you, just throw them on paper. That's it. As soon as you throw facts on paper, you'll be sorted. Just numbers on top of numbers on top of numbers. And there's just so much to the UK. It's not in a good situation right now. Think about it. It's heavily in debt. Its debt is literally, and this sentence is key. 95.5% of GDP. I'm really elaborating. Okay, so cool, they're this much in debt. All right, cool. But this is how much of the debt is actually of GDP. Like, you can make a ratio out of it. You can show that this much is debt and this much is GDP. They're almost the same. That's how bad it's gotten. Key one right there. Hence, the extra financial and opportunity cost of maintaining low inflation would be something the government cannot address as of yet, i.e. supply sides are costly. Given the climate, the government cannot adapt this. So what I've just said is, this is the benefit of inflation. And this is, you know what, this is probably my best ever evaluation. This is the benefit of inflation. However, this is not something the government can address as of right now. Why? Because given our climate, we are in this situation. Does that make sense? I'm not going one point, however. I'm saying this is one point, however, this is not a sustainable, reachable point in this current climate, in this situation that we are in. It is important to understand that the savings ratio is currently 12%, i.e. people save 12% of their incomes, and given that confidence levels are weak, I've got my given that there as well, the response to a low level of inflation would not be significant, especially with a 4.25% interest rate. It's facts, it's figures, consistently. It can also risk deflation, whereby people don't spend as they wait for things to get cheaper, in layman terms. What does layman terms mean? It's basically just simplifying things out. Like, if I tell you a full story about inflation, just simplifying it out. So saying inflation means prices go higher, if that makes sense. So if I'm talking to someone and they're brand new to economics, layman terms, I'm just simplifying it down for you. A very, very key thing here. It helps you understand the situation better as well, not only the examiner. Hence, although inflation at a low rate is beneficial, given the UK's condition, it may not be the most suitable to boost macroeconomic performance. I like that. It could be argued that low rates of inflation can boost the trade position of the UK. Second point. I've given my point straight away. Could be argued that low rates of inflation can boost the trade position of the UK. Over recent years, the UK has suffered from a current account deficit of 2 to 3% of GDP. And although services such as finance and legal offset this, because the UK specialises in finance and legal services, and that is their trade, that is their speciality, if that makes sense, the UK remains a net borrower. I really like that sentence. So I'm giving the UK's climate, I'm tailoring it specifically to the UK. Like we were doing extracts before, if you take the UK out here and put a different country, it just does not make any sense. You have to be very, very, very specific to the one country itself, in this case being the UK. One more time, a current account deficit of 2 to 3% of GDP, and although services such as finance and legal offset this, although they're exporting heavy amounts of finance and legal, they're still borrowing more than they're selling, if that makes sense. A lower rate of inflation can be reflected in trade and can increase the levels of exports via increased competitiveness. Now that exports rise, net exports rise, assuming ceteris paribus with imports. That could be my evaluation. Ceteris paribus, keeping everything consistent, as we were saying before. Considering other economies such as China, an economy heavily reliant on net exports as it forms 30% of AD, and that China has averaged 8.8% growth due to heavy exports, growth increases as illustrated in figure 1 from Y1 to Y2, and the current account deficit is reduced. Banging sentence there. What I could have used is a bit of history. So China's been averaging around 8% growth for the last, I want to say 10 years or so. I might be wrong. I haven't checked the facts and figures yet. But China's been averaging a heavy amount of growth dominantly because of its exports. It manufactures cheap goods, is giving them incredibly cheaply to just loads of different countries, and that is what's boosting its growth and macroeconomic performance as of right now. It could be argued that low rate of inflation is absolutely essential to an economy's macroeconomic performance. As stated above, inflation that is low can boost the trade position, which is especially important to many economies. This is because a trade deficit such as Turkey in 2018 can lead to an economic crisis, and inflation that is low can prevent this. So now I'm talking about Turkey's scenario. So Turkey suffered from I think very high inflation, and now I'm trying to explain why a low inflation rate can prevent something from Turkey happening to us, if that makes sense. So, Turkey was heavily dependent on energy imports in 2018, leading to a huge trade deficit. In order to finance this, the Turkish government sold bonds to gather funds. As the bond prices increased, the yields fell. They have an inverse relationship. As a result of not addressing the key international incompetitiveness, which was the main reason they are actually not doing too well, because they were heavily dependent on the energy imports. So as a result of not addressing the key international incompetitiveness, and by constantly financing it via debt, investors panic sell under the fear that Turkey will default on loans, leading to a 40% reduction in the value of the lira, which is their currency, and a recessionary period as people struggle to pay debts with a much weaker currency, with low rates of inflation. This risk is prohibited, as stated earlier. The trade deficit is reduced via more competitive exports. This happened to Turkey. However, this is not going to happen to us, because this risk has no chance of happening because we are already in this position, if that makes sense. Hence, although this is extreme, low levels of inflation prevent a trade deficit, which can potentially prevent economic crisis. In conclusion, hopefully I've done more wags this time. In conclusion, low levels of inflation is beneficial for an economy's macroeconomic performance. Nice, easy point right there. That's my main thing right there. That's my main point. This is because it leads to higher international competitiveness, reducing the trade deficit, and why that is essential given Turkey's recession in 2018. And why that is essential given Turkey's recession in 2018, as well as raising domestic growth in terms of improved real wages. So what happens is sometimes when you write too fast, you start messing up your words. It looks like I've just learned English at this point. However, considering the current economic position of the UK, it may not be beneficial considering the current UK's economic position, as confidence levels are very weak, as well as high savings ratio of 12%, illustrating how the UK wouldn't necessarily respond as well. I know for a fact, if I had slightly more time, this conclusion would have doubled down because I had so much more to talk about. But timing was definitely an issue for me. That's why I had to slow down my introduction and also my conclusion. But regardless, you can see the examiner said strong analysis, application, and evaluation, and has given me a 25 out of 25 here. So even if you haven't fully doubled down on your essay answers and everything, as long as you've got your evaluation, because that's what the examiners really look for, as long as you've got your analysis and that you're using your facts and figures and your application, sorted. So that is a perfect essay. That is 11 out of 25, 11 out of 15 level 3 analysis for the question above. But I hope that helps in terms of answering any questions. Right, guys, that does wrap it. But if you do have any questions, slap them in the comments and I'll get back to them. On top of that, I'm going to also make a video on how to evaluate and also how to revise, what you should be doing prior to your exam. So stay tuned, be watching them, and subscribe. And I'll catch you, man, in a bit.